at the podium. Thank you for coming. Thank you. Mr. Butterfield is on his way. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today for the public release of a Financial Services Committee Democratic Staff Report that assesses workforce diversity efforts at 7 federal financial services agencies and provides recommendations to help truly achieve inclusion, particularly in senior management positions. So before I begin with this report and its findings and recommendations, I'd like to express my appreciation to the other members of the Tri-Caucus who have joined me today and acknowledge their long-standing efforts in addressing issues that impact racial and ethnic minorities and women and communities of color. In particular, I want to thank Congressman Black Caucus Chair G.K. Butterfield, Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus Chair Judy Chu, and Congresswoman Norma Torres, who is a member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. As ranking member of the Committee of Financial Services, I also want to acknowledge Congressman Al Green's consistent and tireless leadership serving as a ranking member of the Oversight and Investigations Committee, and Congresswoman Joyce Beatty's leadership in monitoring and holding the offices of Minority Women Inclusion, commonly referred to as OMWIs, accountable to satisfying statutory duties required under the Housing and Economic Recovery and Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Acts. We stand here today united and supported by a broad coalition of almost 30 advocacy organizations to bring attention to disturbing trends in diversity personnel practices at financial services agencies, the entities charged with oversight of financial institutions operating within our national financial system. Data in the report led staff to the following key findings and trends across the agencies. Number one, minorities and women remain underrepresented in their workforces. Number two, minorities and women are significantly underrepresented at the senior management level in proportion to their overall participation rates. Number three, African American employees generally receive lower performance management reviews, that is PMRs. They receive these lower scores in ways that show discrimination. So I must share with you that Democratic members of the Financial Services Committee have sat by far too long listening to and witnessing the Republicans attacking the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. They were claiming interest in investigating discrimination complaints from their bureau, but their true motivation is simply hatred for the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, which is the centerpiece of the Dodd-Frank Reform Act that they're trying so hard to dismantle. Democrats then began to insist that if the Republicans are truly interested in the problems of discrimination in our financial services agency, we should investigate all of the agencies. And that's what we set out to do. And it became very clear to us that the Republicans were simply carrying out a political agenda against the best interests of the consumers of this country. However, despite Democrats' repeated calls for expanded, substantive, and bipartisan investigations into diversity and inclusion practices across all of the federal financial regulatory agencies under the committee's jurisdiction and in the private sector, Republicans continued to focus all of their resources attacking the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So undeterred by the political nature of the Republicans' investigation and attacks of the CFPB, and with a sincere interest in these issues, I, along with Ranking Member Green and the Democratic members of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee of the Financial Services Committee, requested that the independent inspectors general at 7 federal agencies audit their personnel practices between 2011 and 2013. And here is the report on the findings and recommendations. After reviewing the IG audit reports, OMWI annual reports, and reviewing other publicly available diversity data, the Democratic Committee staff found some troubling yet entirely predictable patterns. Women and minorities continue to face significant obstacles to employment and a lack of critical access to the most senior managerial positions at the federal financial regulatory agencies. Further, African Americans tended to receive, again, lower performance marks than their white counterparts, essential factors for promotions and bonuses at these agencies. Specifically, at the FDIC, Hispanics make up only 2% of senior management, and Asians comprise just 6% of the same group. At the Federal Reserve, Hispanics, African Americans, and Asians all receive drastically lower performance management review scores than their white counterparts. This is so important because the bonuses depend upon these reviews. The CFPB's senior management is 77% white, while Hispanics make up 5% and blacks make up 8%. The OCC and the FDIC had the lowest number of women in senior management at 31% and 32% respectively. Hispanics made up only 3% of FHFA's general workforce. Asians comprised just 5% of the National Credit Union Administration's general workforce. And at the SEC, our Wall Street cop on the beat, minorities also face significant obstacles to advancement as African Americans, Hispanics, and Asians all together just make up 12% of senior management. This lack of workforce diversity is deeply concerning. It limits regulators' ability to understand the complex challenges facing traditionally underserved communities and populations, and it also compromises their ability to root out targeted forms of discrimination and modern redlining practices that endure in our financial and housing markets. As the agencies responsible for safeguarding our financial system in an increasingly diverse America, diversity and inclusion should be critical components in these agencies' strategic plans. To support this, the staff report contains several recommendations encouraging these agencies to identify the root cause of disparities in hiring and promoting diverse candidates at all levels of employment, enhance interactions between the directors of the Offices of Minority and Women Inclusion with agency heads, provide periodic independent reviews for Congress on the representation of minorities and women within the workforce, and ensure managers are held accountable for achieving diversity objectives. The financial crisis underscored the importance of promoting diversity and inclusion at the federal financial services agencies to ensure diverse perspectives are involved in policymaking and that these agencies are equipped to truly understand and monitor the financial activities and needs of all Americans. It is widely known that the financial services industry has long lagged behind other industries when it comes to diversity and inclusion. It was quite evident in the policies perpetuated by both public and private sector entities in the run-up to the financial crisis, as racial and ethnic minorities and women were systematically excluded from boardrooms and senior management positions, all while communities of color were disproportionately targeted for all manner of predatory lending practices. As a result, communities of color were hit hard by the Great Recession, and there was a tremendous loss in the building of household wealth for many racial and ethnic minorities. Unfortunately, today, even as our nation is in the midst of an economic recovery, the racial wealth gap continues to grow. Numbers released recently by the Federal Reserve show that the average wealth level for white households is $134,000 compared to only $14,000 for Hispanic households and $11,000 for African American households. Distressingly, minority communities continue to suffer the effects of the crisis in the post-recession recovery, as unemployment remains staggeringly high in the African American community at 9.2% and Hispanics at 6.6% also remain above the national average. And so, in conclusion, I'm absolutely committed to ensuring these agencies not only implement these recommendations, but also work to ensure that our financial system accurately reflects an increasingly diverse American population. With our economy continuing to recover from the greatest recession in 80 years, we cannot afford to leave any community behind. With that, I'd like to turn the program over to CBC Chair Butterfield to provide his thoughts on the results of this report.
Thank you and good morning. I realize the bell is rung, and so I'm going to truncate my remarks so that the other two Tri-Caucus chairs can have a word this morning, but thank you so very much. The Congressional Black Caucus has come today to offer its unqualified and unconditional support to Ranking Member Maxine Waters and her staff, and to the Democrats on the Financial Services Committee for an excellent report that depicts a very sad problem that we have discovered in this country. We knew it generally, but after this report has been published, we now know as a fact that African Americans and other minorities are grossly underrepresented in the financial services sectors. The display that you see in front of you is the conclusion. I won't read it. I have it on paper. If Ms. Sewell could just step back for a moment. This is a fact. This is a fact. These are not opinions. These are facts. Minorities and women are underrepresented in their workforces. Minorities and women are significantly, see that word, significantly underrepresented at the senior management level in proportion to their overall participation rates. Finally, African American employees generally received lower performance management review scores than their white counterparts. That cannot be tolerated. So the Congressional Black Caucus supports the Democrats on the Financial Services Committee, and we're ready to join with you in waging this battle to make sure that this inequity is corrected. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. I'd now like to call on Mr. Al Green, who is the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Oversight and Investigations.
Thank you, Madam Ranking Member. I want to thank all of my colleagues, but if I may, I want to especially thank the Ranking Member, because the Ranking Member understands that for many people, discrimination is more than a word. For many people, discrimination is a way of life. She is not a part-time freedom fighter. She's a full-time freedom fighter, and she brings that to the committee, which makes it possible for us to do many things to help eliminate what we see in many circumstances as invidious discrimination. I do concur that the empirical evidence clearly indicates that we have a diversity deficit in these federal agencies, a diversity deficit. In fact, the deficit is one that we might liken to the deficit that we've had with the budget that we have cut, by the way. In 2009, when President Obama came into office, the deficit was $1.4 trillion. That has been cut to $486 billion. That's a substantial increase in our effort to cut the diversity deficit that took place in the economy. I think that we have to apply our same skills and our same willpower to eliminate this deficit in these agencies. And we can do it. It's not a question of way, it's a question of will. And the evidence of will I shall share with you as it relates to the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the CFPB. The CFPB has the highest percentage of women employees in the general workforce at nearly 50%. And it's ironic that the CFPB is the entity that is consistently under attack The CFPB has demonstrated to us that there is a way if you have the willpower. The way is as follows. The CFPB has redesigned its performance management system. The CFPB has offered diversity and inclusion training to all of its employees. The CFPB has reviewed and updated its hiring process. The CFPB has conducted employee listening sessions, and they deal directly with the CFPB OMWI director. The way is here for us. We but only have to have willpower to get this deficit reduced, just as we have, notwithstanding all of the acrimony in Congress, reduced the budget deficit. Thank you, Madam Leader, and I look forward to calling you Madam Chair in the near future.
Thank you so very much. Next, we'll have Congressional Asian Pacific Caucus Chair, Congresswoman Judy Chu.
As chair of the Congressional Asian Pacific Caucus, I'd like to commend Maxine Waters and the Financial Services Committee for this incredibly important diversity report. It has shined a light on something that we suspected. People of color and women are underrepresented in our federal government. This is particularly concerning given that the U.S. is expected to become a minority nation within our lifetime. In fact, APIs are expected to reach 20% of our nation's population by 2020, yet APIs only account for about 5% of the total federal workforce and only 4% of those at SES levels. We need to change this. With this report, I call on our government to reaffirm the commitments and values espoused in Dodd-Frank. When we have a government that truly reflects the diversity of our population, we can better serve all our citizens. And now I'd like to turn the podium over to our incredible member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, the gentlewoman from California, Norma Torres.
Thank you, Congresswoman Chu, and thank you so much to our ranking member, Maxine Waters, for working together with the members of Financial Services Committee to bring to light what we have already known. This is nothing new to women and minorities. This is an issue that we will continue and we have been fighting for many, many, many years. As a young 18-year-old in private business, I started selling stainless pipe valves and fittings, worked my way up from being a file clerk to a salesperson. As a salesperson representative, I brought in over $1 million every single month in comparison to $20,000 or $30,000 my male colleagues brought in. Yet, I was still earning a salary of a file clerk. Now, we know that this has been a problem for private industry, but when it comes to governmental agencies, it is absolutely embarrassing and unacceptable that we treat minorities and specifically women, which we know are the heads of households, this way. We work very, very hard to climb our way up the ladder. And when we get there, we deserve fair and equal pay. And I'm very proud of the Black Caucus. I'm very proud of the members of the Financial Services Committee for bringing light to an issue that we have already known. And on behalf of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, I am eager to continue to work with you to shine the light and to ensure that our workers, minority workers and women specifically, have an opportunity to be successful. Thank you.
I'd now like to call on Representative Beatty, who is a member of the Financial Services Committee and our lead person overseeing OMWI.
Thank you, and thank you, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, for being our leader, and I'm honored to join you today. We've heard not only the facts, but we've heard a real story of how we have been affected as women and minorities. So today we come with a report that we're going to continue to have a watchful eye on. As we go back to the Financial Services Committee, to the Oversight Investigation Committee, we will make sure that these numbers increase. Because the persistent lack of diversity in the financial service industry has been confirmed by this report led by the Democratic members of the House Financial Services Committee and our ranking member, Congresswoman Maxine Waters, to author Section 342 of the Dodd-Frank, which created within each federal financial regulator's office an Office of OMWI, and we've heard that is the Office of Minority and Women in Inclusion, which is charged with supporting workforce and supplier diversity throughout each agency's activities. Thanks to Congresswoman Maxine Waters, I've been able to be a vocal supporter, and that is why in June of this year, I was disappointed when the 6 federal financial regulators issued the Financial Interagency Policy Statement establishing joint standards for assessing the diversity policies and practices of entities regulated by the agencies without requiring mandatory disclosure data and reporting a timeline. So today, we want you to continue to look at the materials, to read the report, because within that report, we're not just saying what has happened. We have outlined ways and opportunities for these agencies to do what we have known that they should do. So I want to thank you for being here today, and I want you to know that the members of this Financial Services Committee Oversight Investigation are here to make sure that we make a difference in not only the federal agencies, but in our communities by improving the numbers that we have with women and minorities. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Are there any questions from the press? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. I'm James Wright with the Washington Afro-American newspaper. I just have a brief question. What do you, Congresswoman Waters, say to those who say that, well, we can't find qualified minorities for management?
As you know, we have heard that for many years when we have challenged those who are basically responsible for discrimination. And some of the things that we do is we talk about outreach, and we ask people about outreach. What did you do to locate and to find competent minorities to serve in these positions? What colleges did you go to? What universities did you ask? We also talk about not only colleges and universities, but we talk about advertising in non-traditional ways. For example, if you're only advertising in the 1 or 2 general newspapers, you're not going to get to the minorities that you claim to want. We ask them about their knowledge of minority newspapers and radio stations, and we tell them we will supply you with the information. There should be no excuses that you're not able to find competent workers for these positions. We use the specific definition for that, but of course, when we take a look at how we're represented in the overall workforce, what are our numbers in the general population, then we can begin to talk about what we think is fair. For the members who did the study, what definitions did we actually use? Where is Jason? Yes.
So for the purposes of the study, we looked at the civilian labor force and restricted it exclusively to the North American Industry Classification Code for finance and insurance, but that itself is a very limited source of information. We agree with the ranking member that looking broadly at the workforce population as a whole is a better way to get an accurate representation as to how these agencies should reflect their workforces.
So just for clarification purposes, when you take a look at trying to match our representation in the workforce, we're using a very limited definition. Because of discrimination, We are not represented in the workforce relative to or consistent with what our numbers are in the overall population. So it is a population that we should be looking at. Yes. Any other questions?
May I give a comment?
I beg your pardon?
May I give a comment?
Sure.
I want to give this comment with reference to why it's so important that we do this. We've mentioned many reasons, but there's another reason that we don't mention. These workers are paid with tax dollars. Tax dollars. These tax dollars come out of their pockets. It's only fair that they be properly represented so that they can benefit from the tax dollars that they pay into the federal coffer. And while there are many standards to be utilized, I do think this workforce standard is a good one because we ought to have something close to our representation in the workforce, not a quota, but at least a goal of meeting or exceeding our representation in the workforce. Thank you.
And Maxine, may I
Yes,
say something to
go right ahead.
the reporter that asked the question about finding minorities? I usually like to say that that is an excuse when people say that. And Maxine not only gave you a great answer, she outlined it. So I tell them that when you're looking for minorities, you do the same thing when you're looking for non-minorities. You just do it in different ways. So for example, if you're looking for a person and you've been traditionally hiring a non-minority because you went to Harvard or Stanford, you keep doing that, but you also go to a Howard or a Spelman. You're here representing a minority paper. So when you go to the newspapers, you have to be more inclusive because we can find what we want to find.
Well, I'd like to thank everyone, first of all of the members who have participated here this morning, all of you who've come from the press and from some of the staffs around the Capitol. I think you know that this study is connected with our overall concern about closing that wealth gap. We have also introduced a resolution on the wealth gap. If we are to close the wealth gap, we have to make sure that we start right here at home in the federal government. We have to go to state and local agencies also and into the private sector. So we're going to be on this. We're not going to rest until we open up opportunities for minorities in federal government, in state and local governments, and of course, in the private sector. Discrimination has lasted and persisted for far too long. We will not tolerate it any longer, and because we are here in this Tri-Caucus, our numbers are strong. We can leverage our numbers to force real action in all of these agencies in ways that will help us get rid of discrimination and isolation. So thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.